You the rich auntie for real.
I try to erase that because when they start with rich auntie, you know what comes after that.
Yeah. So let me hold some.
Well, I'm really. Welcome to the Rich and Regular podcast, where we explore life at the intersection of money. I'm Julian.
And I'm Kirsten.
And today we're speaking with a very, very special guest. She's one of our favorite people, one of our favorite authors, one of our most inspirational stories ever. She's also the author of the new, incredible, comprehensive, and well-written book, F.I.R.E for Dummies. And so if you are a dummy, you are confused about what F.I.R.E is, or if you're just looking for a resource that covers it all in incredible, remarkable detail, this book is for you. This conversation is for you.
Yes. Sometimes we like to think of ourselves as lighthouses that are just attracting people to the financial independence movement. But once they get into it, we kind of think of ourselves as doctors who are writing prescriptions and recommendations for other content creators and resources for whatever ails them. If you are struggling with debt, then try this person. If you're struggling with community, try this person, follow this person. And our guest today, Jackie, is one of our most recommended prescriptions ever. We are always referring to her. She's the co-host of the Catching Up to 5 podcast. She achieved financial independence in her 40s after ending a 10-year marriage and becoming a single mom, all while making less than $100,000 a year. Yeah. I think of her as a big sister, partially because she gives great hugs, but also because she gives great advice. So I hope y'all enjoy the conversation. I hope you get as much from it as I know I will, and tune in to learn more.
Jackie, how you doing?
I am doing great. It's so awesome to be hanging out with you guys. Like a little reunion over here.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
When was the last time we saw you in person? Was that economy?
Which year? It wasn't last year. So it might have been 2 years, you guys. 2 years ago, I think.
Man. Yeah. Too long.
Yeah,
we've been seeing each other online and all that, and we cross paths virtually, but not much in person. So we have to fix that, right?
Well, you've been a little busy writing a little book, just a little.
Well, now you guys too. Back at you.
I want to talk about that a little bit, and I can't think of a positive way to frame it up, and so I'm going to apologize for being a bit of a sourpuss right out the gate, because the only thing worse than the percentage of Black financial advisors, actually I think Black authors is a little bit better, but they're both just horrifically low. But you have joined a small percentage of people who have had the privilege of writing a book, and I think what you've done is extraordinary, because you've also joined a storied franchise, one that is well respected in the self-development, personal development, business, and money space, the For Dummies series. How has it felt for you as a writer to accomplish this goal? And just generally speaking, how does it feel to have the book be out there on shelves?
It feels like that. Okay. I got to exhale. One of the things I personally wasn't ready for was, like, I published a book about 10 years ago. It was self-published. I got to go at my own pace. It took 2.5 years. This book took 6 months, and they moved like really fast. Right. And I had been retired, so I wasn't used to those rigid timelines, but I looked at them and I agreed with them. I'm like, hey, I'm retired. I could do this. But the ideas aren't flowing all the time. Right. My creative juices aren't always, moving like they should. So it was stressful to me. And I had some things planned where I wasn't going to change them for the book. I adjusted the timeline by 2 weeks one time, but I kept on task thinking about the big picture. Right. So it just feels good that part is over with. But the whole time, I guess my motivation was I need to get this out in the atmosphere. And I'm thrilled that I'm the one to do it. That meant a lot, because we have to represent. It's not very many. You talked about the small number of African Americans in a lot of these financial spaces, and it's so true. I mean, we traveled in a lot of different spaces here, and the representation still isn't there because our voice and our lens is just so different. And I wanted to put that in the book. There's a lot that cross over, no doubt, but there's a lot of things that I knew I had experienced and that was in my mind that I wasn't seeing anywhere else. And I know you guys probably saw the same thing.
For sure. Before we actually pressed official record, we had a brief exchange, just catching up as we normally do. But you were talking about one of the reels that we had published, and I meant what I said. I actually don't remember exactly what I said, but I know what I felt.
I do.
And it was something to the effect, because I've had this conversation with Kirsten privately, several times before. I was waiting for the moment to actually get my hands on the book, because in my opinion, it signified a bit of a formal step forward for the movement and the broader community as a whole, to go from being this niche thing that, weirdos do online into the official, almost like hall of seriousness in, not even just from a literary standpoint, but I think from a broader personal finance media standpoint. It went from being this little awkward thing that a handful of people do, I believe, to once you've reached the For Dummies status, it's like, no, it's mainstream. Do you agree with that? Or do you have a similar or different point of view?
I feel like once I got this For Dummies collaboration, that meant that it was widestream enough to produce this type of book. But I don't believe that F.I.R.E is mainstream at all, because I'm in so many spaces that are just not traditional, even financial education. And that's why I continue to try to, move into those spaces and, share what it's all about, break it down. So we got a long way, in some of the groups you'll hear people saying, what if everybody fired? Then the world would come to an end. I don't know. It's like, let me tell you, we are not in danger of that.
Not even close.
No,
I
not
never
even
understood
close.
that line.
No.
I never understood it.
And I guess it's sort of the people that are around them. Everybody seems to be talking about it. But if you get out of your bubble, not everybody's talking about it. And I'm in a lot of bubbles, so you guys probably are too, where they're not talking about it and they don't even know what F.I.R.E stands for.
Yeah. Did you get any criticism from inside of the F.I.R.E bubble that putting it in the For Dummies franchise oversimplifies it or introduces it to people who it may not be for?
No, I haven't gotten any. Doesn't mean that there haven't been any.
Right.
I think you're lying, Jackie. You're nice. You're so nice.
No,
she said it. She was like, "Ooh, I don't want to call this person out."
No,
but
no one has said that. But to me, it needed to be simplified, because like some of these groups that we're in, and we started when F.I.R.E was very new, right? But over time, some of these groups and forums get really big. And then you'll have the same people asking the same questions again and again. Okay, so I have the mind and the heart of a teacher. So when someone asks that, what is it going to hurt you to say, yeah, maybe you mentioned, we talked about it before, but here's the deal. You might have a whole bunch of different new people that are now responding to that question that was different than before. But inevitably, this is what I hated, inevitably, the rudest person will be the first one to say, oh, you can use the search feature, or this has been asked 100 times, just in a very condescending way. Like, you should know that. Why are you asking that dumb question? And I'm like, I don't even like that. It's like, and that's always the first person that responds, right? And so this person is now sort of deflated. And I'm like, you know what? There's a lot of these same questions. I've seen them, you've seen them. I would love to see them written somewhere in a very clear, concise way, maybe from somebody that has kind of seen the whole timeline of F.I.R.E that can speak to the beginning, the middle where you're actually, getting ready to pull that trigger, and then even after. So I wanted to break down the basics for that person that's asking that question, where somebody thinks it's stupid or somebody thinks it's been asked too many times. Here is your resource to answer most of those basic questions. And I'm going to give you a lot of other resources that can help you out too.
I love that. I want to switch a little bit and talk about your story and specifically the odds, because the reality is you're black, you're divorced, single mom, grew up poor in South Carolina, never made over $100,000, and still managed to retire with 1.3 million at age 49. And I honestly think that women like you are some of the most underrepresented faces of the FIRE movement. You're not underrepresented as a whole. We're here. People like you, people like me are in the movement, but we're not necessarily the faces of it. And it goes back to what you're saying around kind of twisting the narrative and welcoming different types of questions and different topics. And I just want to know, are there some topics based on your own experience or based on what you hear from people that you think we should be spending more time on or less time on to actually reflect diverse experiences, to actually be open to new people with different backgrounds coming in and being curious to begin with?
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of cultural stuff. I think one of the biggest things that I see that I seem to see more in the Black community is, okay, let's say you're graduating from high school, you're graduating from college, you're starting your life, okay? A lot of Black people that I know are first generation college graduates. And so you are kind of the one that made it. And instead of the family being the ones to push you up and sort of be the wind at your back, we're the ones that are having to reach back and help our family out. So generally, if I'm going to dinner with my family, whatever, I'm going to pick up the bill. And I'm okay with that because I know that financially it's going to hurt me the least. So I have to kind of budget that in. And I don't hate it. Like other people looking at that might say, oh no, they need to pay their own, or I'm not trying to spend my money. I want to, it's like, I don't want to do that. I want to help my family out. I'm happy that I've come as far as I come. And I think early on, I was able to say, my cup runneth over. Like a lot of people will question, is $1 million enough? I don't know if that's enough for you or not, but you know what? It's enough for me. And I
That's
feel like
it.
my cup runneth over where I'm at the point where I can help other people. I can get myself out of almost any jam I can think of as long as I still got my brain. But now it's time for me to help other people. I don't know when the switch turned on to where I was in legacy building mode. And I'm not really even talking financial. I'm talking about spreading the knowledge that I have into communities and a lot of people that grew up just like me that that I know need to hear this message. And being a part of the traditional financial industry, CFP world and all that, they're not checking for the person that's making $60,000 a year working at a manufacturing facility. They're just
Mm-hmm.
not. Okay. So I'm having to be the one to do that. Like, I don't want to do one-on-one financial planning because you'll never be able to touch enough people. So that's why I'm trying to
Mm-hmm.
do one to many. Like the book does that, and a lot of other things. It's like, how can I get more ears and more ears of people that may not have already heard this message and need me as the messenger?
Were there any other unwritten rules that you had to ignore or just tune out on your way? Because your point about the $1 million is so important. And we talk about this all the time. We tell people, like, you need to know a number because you need to know the direction that you're going in, but don't be so fixated on it because there's always going to be someone who either tells you that that's not enough or the market will move and you'll feel like it's not enough. And so there's some inner work that has to be done too. There is this sense of abundance and resourcefulness and okayness that you need to feel about your general approach. Were there any other unwritten rules or things that even if you had read the book, you wouldn't have known until you experienced it along the way?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is like the mental and emotional stuff. One of the things I did after I retired was I was just so interested in the psychological aspects of money. And so I went back and I got a degree in financial therapy. And I think we need to give ourselves more grace. Think about like how, not just how you grew up in your childhood, but like generations back. And a lot of people like to say, when we talk about slavery, okay, so yeah, that might have been 200 years ago, whatever. But psychologically, just like your family that might have owned a plantation 200 years ago, that stuff gets handed down. Like when we hear our parents, our grandparents, our great grandparents talk about segregation, for instance, I get appalled and almost scared when they tell me some of the stories. And I'm like, my grandmother was treated like that. That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of get, and, fast forward, I kind of get that from my daughter. You know how these days, or back in the day when I was in corporate America, you couldn't talk about race. There were, to me, a lot of sexist things that were said and things like that. And you just went on about your business. Okay. Now things are very different. And when I tell my daughter, no, honey, that's how it was. Just no, that's impossible. So it's just so funny how, the stories and the feelings are handed down from generation to generation. So those things are in our hearts and we cannot unsee them. I mean, I'll even be at the hairdresser sometimes and, I have an older lady that is telling me about just these crazy incidents where, it's just unbelievable to think that those things happen, but they did. And so those things being handed down to us, that plays into how we think about money. So you can't just skip that emotional part. Now, there's nothing you could do about the past, but you can acknowledge it. You could say, well, maybe that's why I feel this way about it. Even with debt, which was a good thing. My dad was very debt averse. Even though we didn't have much money, he was very debt averse. And I think that debt aversion has helped me. And why? It's because I modeled my dad that said, if you want money, if you want something, just like when I went to college, I ended up, working way more than I should have while I was in college. But his message and I guess the characteristic that I got from him was, if you need money for something, you work for it. So I didn't even think about student loans because that's kind of, how I was taught. And speaking of student loans, that's another thing where I know it plagues a lot of people. And you hear that general advice about get rid of all of your debt. And to me, whenever you say that, you need to say, well, student loans has to be treated completely different if you're trying to do this smart. You've got income-driven repayment. You've got a lot of different ways that you can handle that debt that is very, very different from any other debt. And it's not saying that you shouldn't pay it off. It's just saying if you're going to do this smart and you want to create a hierarchy of what's most important, then let's make sure we look at that. But, a lot of people that are talking about, teaching people to pay off debt and stuff like that, some of them never had student loans and they don't even understand that student loan system. So that's a piece that I dug into, and I definitely segmented that in the book. Like when you're prioritized, you have to prioritize your debt. I don't care if you use snowball, avalanche, or whatever, but we've got a third one, and that third one is student loans.
Yeah, that is absolutely one of the unwritten rules. I didn't realize how much strategy was involved. You think of math as just basic addition and subtraction, and I spend less than I make and I just put aside the rest. And it's like, actually, when it comes to paying off debt, when it comes to getting loans, when it comes to starting businesses, when it comes to tax strategy, there are all of these things that you have to keep in mind. It doesn't mean that it has to be complicated, whatever you decide on. But you certainly have to understand things like statistics and odds and algebra to figure out exactly what you're solving for and make sure that you understand like what the consequences of every decision that you make. I don't think I realized there were so many ripple effects that would happen after I made a decision with my money, both on the good side and the bad side. There were lots of things that I underestimated on the benefit side. And then there were stuff that I didn't know until I experienced it. But the good news is that a lot of it is fixable. And as long as you have the time and the passion and the curiosity, you can figure out what to do next.
Right. And I guess another thing when you mention stuff in the book that I don't hear talking about a lot is the Social Security part. I mean, I was the biggest pessimist, no doubt. And admittedly, I did not even include Social Security at all in my retirement plans at all. And I was finally, once I got, I retired, I cleared the cobwebs out of my head and I thought about it. I wanted to dig and look at it through a different lens. So normally when you hear people talk about Social Security, they're talking to 60-year-olds, right? I'm like, well, what about, someone that retires early? Let's say somebody that cut out way sooner than, 60. I want to see what that person, what Social Security looks like for that person. So I did all these different, scenarios and case studies and all of that. But it helped me realize the, I guess the reality when it comes to Social Security. And it's okay if you don't want to count it, but just do it from a position of knowledge and education to say, okay, I'm going to use that as my buffer. But if I didn't, then, I could expect it to be slashed by 75%. that's your worst case scenario. But that's a powerful bucket of money in your older years because it's adjusted for inflation. You get it for the rest of your life. And really, that's the only truly passive income because you've done all this hard work in the beginning, so you're actually helping with your retirement before, even if you don't have anything in your 401k or your IRA, you're working on that retirement just by working a job because you're paying into the Social Security system. And, worst case, it's a powerful backstop. So that's why I'm less worried today about my money running out than I did when I retired. Because, when I pulled my numbers, even if I take it at 62, I'm at $2,500 a month. I'm like, that's nothing to laugh at. Adjusted for inflation for the rest of my life. I'm like, okay, and I work for that. Nobody's giving me anything. I paid into that system. So.
Yes. Okay. So I probably need to reread that chapter and have a pep talk because I definitely don't count it. And you're right. I probably should.
Well, we have it's privilege. Your privilege is showing, right? So I get it. Well, I just think let's just be honest, right?
Well, I'm also just this is the one area where I am pessimistic about things where it's just like, I just don't know. I don't know if we got it in us.
I think you're right to be pessimistic. And I guess the one thing that kind of seems to click with most people is the fact that the reason why it won't completely go away is because as long as you have younger workers paying that FICA line item, look at that line item on your pay stub, or that covers Social Security, that covers Medicare. So you've got all these millions and billions of workers that's paying into that system. That's a portion of what is paid out to the people that's collecting benefits today. So you're at least going to have that. That trust fund, that essentially is an emergency fund, and you want to have the backup. And that's why they're saying there'll be a shortfall. More than anything, more than likely, they're definitely going to do something. This is not the only time in history that has happened. But if the trust fund is scheduled to run out in December of 2034, they won't do anything until November 2034. That's just how Congress works. So don't expect anything to be even seriously looked at until it's crunch time.
Yeah. I find myself, and maybe because it's top of mind, based on last week, but I find myself recommending your book and your podcast more and more often. I think especially after a speaking engagement, I can think of just a few weeks ago, multiple people that came up to us and they say something, and then we both look at each other and like, you need to follow Jackie.
Is that why I saw that spike in book sale?
It might be.
I hope so.
Thank you guys.
Yeah, of course. But you are the host also of the podcast, Catching Up to F.I.R.E. And, one of the things that I love about that, probably the biggest thing, is that it's designed specifically for late starters. And we get that question all the time. Is it too late for me? What if you're just starting out? Like, they may find us and feel like, oh, well, it's easy for them to say because they started when they were in their 30s or something like that. But you guys, you refer to them as the silent majority, which I absolutely love. I'm curious around whether or not you've had a similar experience like we have, which is that we have found that generation, that group of people, these late starters are hesitant to be vulnerable, which is why I'm so complimentary of the few that I find that are willing to admit, hey, I missed out. I'm just learning. I find that many of them are very hesitant. I'm curious whether or not you experienced that. And if so, how do you get over that and try to push them or persuade them to be willing to be more transparent so that they can start unlocking some of the jewels, not just in your content, but to start taking action with respect to their financial life?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people that are afraid to be vulnerable. A lot of times there's terms I would use are, shame. They're embarrassed that they don't know this. They're so behind. They might be further behind than their kids or their other counterparts. And it just is not a good feel. I felt that same way, when I finally woke up. And it's okay. There's just so much out there where you don't necessarily have to be vulnerable until you're ready, but you can still start to gather that education. I always say podcasts are like the best free classroom you'll ever have, or go to YouTube or read a book, whatever your preferred way of learning. But I think a lot of people come to our group and they listen to our podcast. The average person is probably a late starter. This stuff wasn't taught in school. If you got taught this stuff at home, then kudos to you. But for most people, that's not the case. So we hear that all the time. And we just start talking. Basically, we just say, well, join the club. You're not by yourself. And it's probably not later than you think. And I mainly say three things. It's never too late to start. When you let's see if I can remember those three things. So it's never too late to start. It's better late than never. It's never too late to start. And when you start, keep going.
Yes.
Because I put myself out there. As you know, I have been very vulnerable. And so is my co-host, Bill Yant. But I have been very vulnerable. And part of it is because hopefully it will help someone else resonate a little bit and not just hear the stories where, oh, yeah, I got out of college and I built this great website and that, catapulted me or whatever. I want you to hear the grimy stories and the things that, actually happen. And when I started waking up, the first thing was like, education, trying to figure it out. And I was running real hard because I felt like I was way behind. I'm in my late 30s. And I guess I was running so fast. And most people do this. When the light bulb turns on, they get going and they get going really fast. So I had no desire and no idea that it would have taken me 10 to 12 years to catch up, not only catch up, but to be able to retire early like I did. That wasn't in the plan. It wasn't in my, so I know that most people, it's the same way because you got some things that's working to your advantage.
I've got a follow-up question here. Do you think that there is an advantage that a late starter might actually have?
Yeah.
That they may not be giving themselves any credit for?
There's a lot. When we do the breakout economy and different places that we speak at, the first thing we will do is say, let's acknowledge what might have caused you to get a late start. So we allow them to either vent or share, this is what happened to me. And we hear all kinds of stuff. And then the second part is, do you think you have any advantages? Is there anything that you think is going to help you get caught up now that you kind of realize you want to make some movement here? And the first thing is not even financial. The first thing is when you get older, and you guys, I wouldn't consider you older, but you're probably at this point where you really don't care much about what people think. It's like, this is not third grade on the playground. We don't care what you think no more. Okay. So that's an advantage, right? You drive the car you want, you live where you want, you do more things that you want. But here's some other advantages. You guys got, little Bo. So typically we don't have the little kids in that expensive daycare, like when they're really, really little. Okay. So you're over that. A lot of times you might be in empty nesters where the kids are out, and now you got a lot more flexibility. You can either downsize or you can move, you can do whatever you want. And then we mentioned the Social Security. Well, more than likely, let's say if you're 40, 50 years old, some people even 60, just waking up. Well, you probably already got that 35 years that they use to calculate Social Security. So you already got that, and you might not be counting it. Typically, if you're, between 45, 55, that's right around your peak earning years. So you're earning a lot more. When you just start out, you're just bottlenecked with a low salary and high expenses. So those are just a few financial things that I don't think a lot of people think about, but there are some advantages. And I think that's sort of the fuel that helps you go faster once you wake up when you're older.
Yes. I actually have a theory about this. I think America is in her storytelling bag right now. There's lots of stories about people who have, beat the odds, and we're arguing about which story is more relatable. There's this side of the story and this side of the story. But I do believe that we're going to be looking at this late starter revolution, and it's not going to be age specific. Right. Because people are living longer, because jobs are changing, because the half-life of skills is being eroded by AI, a lot of people are going to have to start over and over and over and over and over again. And what I love about you is that you're not just talking the talk, you're actually walking the walk. You have done things since you've left the traditional workplace. You weren't born a podcaster. You weren't born credentialed with a AFP or a CFP. These are all things that you've decided to do. But I guess my question is, when we talk about time relative to FIRE, we're always talking about like the benefits of starting early. And we're always talking about time as something that you need to accelerate your investment strategy. But has your perspective on time changed now that you've been immersed in this late starter world? Because you just mentioned all of these benefits that people still have time for, and they don't understand how the time passes when you're in a different stage of life. Has your perspective changed?
Um, I think so. I feel like you said, I'm at the second half of life, and I don't feel like I completely missed out on the first half, but I know things would have been better if I would have, started a lot sooner. But I can't go back. So I do, we're living a lot longer. So I feel like definitely what has changed is that I got a lot more years than I thought I had. And I'm not I'm not embarrassed about them. I think I might have been before. So, for instance, I'm like 50 something years old, walking across the stage to get my master's degree. Me and my daughter, we actually went to Kansas State. That's where I did my program. I'm like, let's go graduate. So we went and I walked across the stage, 50 something years old, just getting that and getting my CFP at 50 something years old. It's like, I don't know that I feel much different, but I just know that even if I only had 5 years to use that, I can make a lot in those 5 years. And
That's
and
it.
and I guess I try to live my life like, honestly, if I die tomorrow, and we all are going to one day, but have I done the things that I wanted to do? Am I leaving the legacy for my daughter that I want to leave? Which again is not just financial. It's like, what will people say, at your eulogy or your funeral? People that knew me that didn't know my daughter, what will they tell her about me, where I touched their lives in some way? So I think about
Yes.
that every day. So I think that gives me sort of a little additional energy to say, you know what? I don't know if I'm going to be here in a week. I don't know if I'm going to be here in 5 years, 50 years. I don't know, but I want to keep doing as hard as I can. That's still, making me happy, but where I can like maybe touch someone or touch something in society that's going to make it better because of me. And, one person can only do so much, but the things you do can go a long way. And I guess I learned this a long time ago, where you just never know sometimes that one thing you said, how big it might have impacted someone. I've been on the receiving side of that and the giving side of that. So don't think that something really small is meaningless or it's not worth doing. It could mean a whole lot to that receiving person, or something somebody else did for you could be a really big deal, a really big thing. So, yeah.
That's so important because I think as we get older, we underestimate how much our children, or even just young people, if you don't have any children,
Right.
are looking to us for the example. And
Right.
so, if all of these opportunities exist today, the opportunity to talk about race, the opportunity to talk about money, the opportunity to make money outside of a traditional employer, if all of that exists today, but none of us are taking advantage of it, what does that teach them? What does it show them?
Right.
And to your point about passing on generational ideas and stories, it's like we're passing on this idea inadvertently that that's not for us. And at some point, because that's the thing that drives us, at some point we have to decide that it is. And as scary as it is to be vulnerable, and now we're encountering different types of ism. There's a lot of ageism when you're talking about media and technology and content. But at the same time, it's important for them to see us trying to me,
Right.
because otherwise, how are we going to convince them to try when their new thing comes out, whatever it is, holographic or
Right.
whatever the kids are going to be creating in 20 years?
Yeah.
It's
And good.
virtual avatars,
Yeah.
real
Yeah.
avatars. This won't even really be me. It's just
Right.
the avatar that I built.
Oh, well, and good point about just the next generation, or even our counterparts. Like my neighbor, we do sort of a skills trade. I guess I hear that talked about a little bit, but probably not enough. But skills trade, like I was telling you, my neighbor before we went on, he's a great tech guy. He's got 20 something computers, anything tech, he is there. And you know what? He's willing to help me. And I feel so silly, certain little things that I don't know, but computers are not my thing. But I mean, he can open up a computer in 2 seconds. I'm like, you're going to open that up? He's like, yeah, all you do is blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay. But when it comes to financial stuff, I get him straight on him and his wife, Angie, I get them straight on all of their financial stuff. So I'm like, this is a perfect little give and take. And not to mention
Yes.
all the nieces. I've got 11 nieces and nephews, one is a boy, only one nephew. All the rest are girls, but they are just important. They are like my kids too. So they are just important to me, and important enough that I'm hopefully leaving an impression on them as well. So I got one daughter, but then, I've got 11 nieces and nephews and a whole community of people that I care about. And if I, like you guys, if we have this knowledge, we have a duty to share it with the first people I want to share it with is the community that I came from, because I don't think I'm that special. And there's just so many other people that I know are amazing. They're brilliant. They're smart. But if you're not exposed to certain things, how are you going to learn? So I'm like, these people, there's so many of them that's way smarter than I am. So I can't forget about those people.
Yes.
Man, you the rich auntie for real.
I try to erase that, because when they start with rich auntie, you know what comes after that.
Yeah.
So
let me hold some.
Well, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I wanted to ask you that question before when you were talking about, your spirit and wanting to leave a legacy and being a teacher, and I think you, unlike me, have a deep and strong tolerance for those kinds of exchanges and a willingness to just teach and those kinds of things. I don't have that, and so I applaud you. I'm curious, before I get to my next question, how have you dealt with your transparency around money, obviously your focus on your passion, while also coping with the fear that a lot of people have, and I'm sure a lot of people who are inspired by you have, around taking that kind of leadership position when you are afraid that it may send a certain signal and have a bunch of people that you love asking you for money? Because let's just be honest, right? If we're talking about our family members, like, I'm willing to bet you are at the top of the socioeconomic totem pole. It's scary, right? Like, you've saved up a massive amount of money, but it ain't enough to bring everybody from South Carolina with you.
Right.
So how have you dealt with that? Or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's something I had to think long and hard about. So here were my two choices. I could either not share my numbers for fear of, family, friends, or people around me wanting to ask me for money or see me in a different way or whatever. Or I could share my numbers and let the chips fall where they may. So I let the chips fall where they may. Now, my closest family, my siblings, is 6 of us. And the one thing that I'm glad my dad taught me was, you get your own. So I've never had any big issue with my family saying, oh, you need to take care. Both of my parents are gone, but, and siblings, I don't have anyone necessarily with their hand out. Like I said, if we go to dinner or something like that, I'm totally fine and have no issue with covering the check. And it's honestly, my pleasure, because, we're going to a regular restaurant and okay, it's a couple $100. That's just not going to set me back. But if it will lighten their load, allow them to pay an extra light bill or anything else, I'm happy to do it. So I didn't run into my immediate family, but I know there's probably, people wondering, well, should I ask her for money, or she's got all this money, she should be doing whatever. People are going to say what they say. I remember when I told you one of the benefits or the advantages that late starters have is you really don't care much about what people think. I care about the people that I know are important in my life, or people that I respect. And of course, we all need those people around us. But what people think is just going to span the gamut. But I haven't had any issues that have been negative enough or powerful enough to want me to stop doing it, because my drive towards financial education and financial literacy, and the fact that transparency breeds that trust, I don't want to do anything different. So I would say I've been sharing my numbers since I retired, 5 years. And I haven't had anything that discouraged me enough to not want to do it anymore.
I think that's so awesome and cool for a couple of reasons. But top of mind is because I know for a fact there are a lot of people who are deathly afraid of that. They feel like, I will never do that. And as a result, it creates a bit of a wall between them and other people who could really benefit from what they have to offer, be it literal expertise or just their experience in navigating some kind of financial situation. And the more I have these kinds of conversation with people who I know have a lot to give, very few of them can actually give us real examples of times or situations where someone has asked them and they felt like pressured or something like that. I really do think it's something that a lot of us just make up in our heads, very similar to real estate investors or prospective real estate investors who are definitely afraid of owning property because they don't want to get a call at 3 o'clock.
a.m.
You know,
Right.
something about
That's
3
right.
a.m. Everybody feels like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do it because you're going to get a call at 3 a.m. And it's like, I
That
don't know
doesn't
very many
happen.
people that have actually gotten the call, right? I think we just
Right.
make it up in our minds. But I want to follow along those lines a little bit because you are, at least from my perspective, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you're one of those few people who I would consider a FIRE purist. But I'm want to like test like how pure you are.
I was about to say, a FIRE purist,
A
define that for
purist,
me.
a purist. Well, one, do you consider yourself a FIRE purist? And then two, specifically as it relates to the 4% rule, do you follow the 4% rule strictly, or are you like us where you also just flex up and down? It just kind of depends on what the year is giving you and maybe supplement some of that income from some of the things that you do.
Yeah. So when you say purist, I'm assuming you mean that I kind of subscribe to the typical FIRE uh, if I'm strictly a FIRE adherent, where I'm following all these tenets that they believe is that of a FIRE. Yeah. No, I don't. And in the book, I have all these non-FIRE confessions, and some of them were mistakes I wouldn't do again. Other ones are like, no, this I want to do. One of the examples would be, a lot of people believe in driving a beater. Okay. I like to buy cars smartly. I keep my cars for a long time, 8 to 10 years, but I don't really want to drive a beater. Okay.
Yeah, you're not driving no hoopties.
Yeah. It's
I
like,
hear you.
if I got to do more than get an oil change and put gas in it and, maybe have the wipers changed out, I don't want to mess with it. Okay. So I don't subscribe to that. I took a 401k loan, back in the day, when I was working, but and here's the caveat I always say: whatever decision you make sure you're doing it from a thoughtful place and a place of knowledge and education. Okay.
That's it.
So and know yourself. Like, I'm not going out and preaching and saying everybody should get a 401k loan. But in my case, I simply use that to pay cash for a condo, to try my hand at landlording. And this was 2009. So houses were depressed and cash was king. So, so it worked out for me, and I knew I wasn't going to take the money and just blow it on a boat or something, So, no, and the 4%, as far as the 4% rule, I've talked to very smart people, Christine Benz, from Morningstar, and a bunch of other smart people, Big Earn, Early Retirement Now. And all of them, say the same thing. And I found this to be true, is that your life is flexible, and you flex with, your money. Like, nobody, I don't know of any example where someone had strictly adhered to taking out exactly 4%. Now, for me personally, since I retired, as you guys probably, every year looks different. And you know what? When you work, every year wasn't the same. Okay, there were certain years you took the big vacation, certain years where you had to get the new roof or the new HVAC system, and certain years where, you having a baby, or, life, or you got laid off of a job, so if your regular life, your regular working life had changes all the time and you shifted, why should that be any different once you retire?
Yes.
Did you say 8-track system?
No.
Did I hear that correctly?
No, you didn't. What sounded like an HVAC?
Oh, HVAC.
HVAC. Okay, I'm sorry.
I
HVAC.
thought you said
Okay.
8-track
Yes,
system.
heating, ventilation, and air system. That can be pretty expensive. That's a 10 grand bill.
I was about to say, wow.
Okay, I am not that old.
You're not that old.
Okay, I am
When did
not
you
that
get it?
old. No, I'm trying to think. Have I ever seen?
And why
an
would you
8-track?
repair it?
Why would you repair that?
No, HVAC system, just these large, that comes with home ownership or whatever.
100%.
Yeah.
So no, but here's the valuable part of the 4% rule. You need something tangible to start with. You need
Absolutely.
a starting point. Okay, you got to do the math some kind of way. So I just say build in, systems, build in a little bit of margin or whatever. But I'm not strictly living off the 4% rule. I think 3 out of the 4 years I did have to, take withdrawals out of my accounts to live on. There was 1 year where I did make enough where I didn't have to. So for every dollar that I might have coming in from a project or something I'm working on, that's one less dollar I have to take from my investments.
Yeah, that's exactly how we tell people to think about it. That's why we created the rules and the rituals in our book, because it was helping people understand that I would say 95% of the rules that we hear in personal finance aren't really rules. They're ideas.
Right.
They're ideas that work for
Guidelines.
a big group of people. And typically those people are in different economic positions than maybe you or I might be. But you can bounce off of them. You can flex them. You can use them how you want to. And that is what makes finance personal.
Right.
that is the point. And your goal as an enthusiast is to get as much information and knowledge to be able to know where to flex and how far and what are the risks and then how to manage those risks. But you don't get out of this just like copying and pasting somebody else's plan. That very rarely works.
Right. You're right.
So this is the last question, because I mentioned the ripple effect earlier, and I'm curious about how it's worked in your life. How do you define quality of life these days? And how has your approach to managing your money influenced the relationships you have in your life, both with others and just with yourself?
Yeah. So as far as managing my money, I don't think I've actually focused on the money part as much as I used to. Like when I was getting ready to fire, I had all these great spreadsheets and I had like this 5 year, I called it my 5 year fire tracker, where I would show everything that I would be contributing and estimate the growth and all that. And it was kind of fun, because you're seeing your money grow. But now the way I look at my life and like happiness and fulfillment is spending more time with my daughter and the people that I love. Sometimes that's family, sometimes it's not. But about how much time is healthy around, your family especially. But I just want, there's just so much more that I want to do, and a lot of things is with my daughter. And I guess what's special about that is that now she's an adult. So it's just so amazing to see how she's growing. Like, so she would be technically millennial, maybe close to Gen X. But the cool thing is, I felt like she was out of the womb, like having her own business. Like she works a regular day job, but then it was so natural to her she's a graphic designer. It was so natural to her to have still her own book of business, her own clients, and her own creative outlet that wasn't bound by the 9 to 5. So I learned a lot from her. So I feel like the roles have been reversed. So that's fulfillment for us to still, do things together. And, we live relatively close now, but I know that's not always going to be the case. So I take advantage of it. We get together at least once a week, we go to dinner, whatever. I've always wanted to like do some international traveling. So all those things that are either like, I guess, bucket list items or things that I just always wanted to do, I'm doing them or asking myself what's keeping me from doing them. And so I'm just more about, let me do the things I wanted to do. What am I waiting for? I'm not working anymore. I don't have to be tied to anything. And then also surrounding myself more with people that are intentional friends, people that I admire, people that I respect. And I think about that, that trade-off. Like, when you work a day job, you guys know, you kind of have default friends because that's who's at the job and they just happen to work in the same place. Now, some of those are extraordinary people, right? Incredible people. And then some of them are not, right? But you still have to be there and be around them. And sometimes it's unpleasant for a number of different reasons. There's sexism, there's all kinds of things that could be going on that it's really toxic, right? But now, I get to choose who I'm around and the things that I'm involved in. Like I would have never met you guys if I was still grinding at the day job. I would have never met my amazing co-host Bill and be hosting this podcast with them. I would have never been writing this book. So I think about the trade-offs, from doing the daily grind like everybody else and trying to do something a little bit different. The shift was hard. I mean, I was used to getting that regular paycheck and, not having to think much about what my workday looked like because my boss told me what I needed to do and what my metrics were. And now that's not the case. It's all on, if I fail, it's all on me. If I win, it's all on me. So that just makes a big difference.
I tell you what, that's been a common denominator. I think I've asked the quality of life question to several guests, from J.L. Collins to Lynette Calfani Cox, and all of them talk about how beautiful their relationship is with their adult children and how they've been able to just do things that blow their minds on a regular basis, things that would not have even been in the realm of possibility. And it's so inspiring for me because I'm still in the trenches of young parenting, young child parenting.
Trenches.
Right. It's a cushy trench, but it is still a trench. And I always, Julie and we're so used to waiting on this shoe to drop where it's like, oh, when he turns 10, he's not going to want to spend time with us. Or, oh, when he's 20 something, he's not going to want to spend time with us. We only got 18 summers left, or whatever the meme says. And then I talk to people in the F.I.R.E community and they're like, no, it just gets better. Like it just gets so much better. And so,
well, that's the thing. I think being younger and you guys having a kid, I was a single mom from the time my daughter was 9 years old, and that was hard and it was a grind. And I was always, stretched between working and trying to spend time with her. And it was just a stressful, tough time. And I really wish, that I'd be in a position where I could just, go to the park with her, when she got out of kindergarten, or when she, had days off, and we could just do so many more things. So if I had to go back and do anything, I wish I could have enjoyed just more time with her without having the stress of work and things like that. And you have things going on at work where you're worried about being laid off or whatever. So now I guess I feel like I'm sort of reclaiming some of that time with her now. Amen.
Well, Jackie, thank you for this. I feel very selfish because I don't know if any of the listeners got as much out of it as I did. I always enjoy talking to you. It always feels like, I said this in the intro, it always feels like a conversation with an older sister or just somebody who has your best interest in mind. So if anybody wants to follow you, if they're not already, because we tell everybody to, where can they find you and where can they find the book?
Well, let me first of all just say I appreciate you guys having me, and you guys are doing amazing work. I have shared your work for a very long time, and I continue to do so. Your voices are very important in this space, so please keep doing what you're doing, and hopefully there'll be more of us. But for me, so the book is F.I.R.E for Dummies, and it is available everywhere you buy books. If you prefer to buy it from an independent bookstore, please feel free to do that, or even go to the library. I would like to get it in as many hands as I can. And then I co-host. This is a lot of fun. Co-host a podcast called Catching Up to F.I.R.E. And we are there for late starters. You are not alone. And so you can just go to catchinguptofI.com. Our podcast, the new episodes drops on Sunday. But that's where they can find me. That's where I'm having the most fun.
Amazing. Thank you for your time. And hopefully we see each other soon.
All right, you guys, take care.
If you like videos like this and want to see more, make sure you click subscribe and turn on notifications.